Welcome to the Catbird Quilts. I'm Kathy Martin. Today's QuiltCon 2024 video is all about the fabric challenge posed by Windham Fabrics. And let me tell you, just some unbelievable quilts in this category. So we're here at the Windham Fabric Challenge, and this is OVERPRINT by betsy.vinegrad. We've seen another one of hers that's also beautiful, and she explains that overprinting is when you print one color over another and it creates almost like a transparency. And so she said she knew she wanted to do something with that, and it is very evident that she did. She did this grid quilting on point, so on the bias, and it has this really magical diamond effect. Very, very small quilting with the beautiful colors that the Windham fabric artisan, Jackie Gehring, is who chose the fabrics this year. So this is the first place winner. So we are on the Windham Artisan Cotton 2024 challenge, which I call the fabric challenge. I don't know if that's it or not. And it is Always and Forever by Tara Evans. So what this is her take on a double wedding ring quilt. And you can see it from a distance, but it's actually easier up close. It's a ring without any curves in it. And so this is the 6 fabrics that were chosen from Windham Fabrics, and you have to use those colors. And so what she did is only pulled out that apple green for the one ring. And she used apple green stitching, quilting, and also the fuchsia, and then the kind of mulberry or plum as well, I believe. So it is really beautiful. It's very subtle. There's a lot of artistry here that is, I think it would be easy to kind of blow past it. It evokes curves without actually having curved piecing. And that is Always and Forever by Tara Evans in the Fabric Challenge category. So this is Windham Whiskers by Barbara Sucher, S-U-C-H-E-R. And you can totally see it. So her use of the colors is to make these little whiskers across the squares. And she pieced some of the whiskers to get a mixture of the colors, so it keeps it really interesting. And it looks like she used variegated thread in her quilting. So she used not only the colors of the fabric, but also in her quilting thread as well. This is my Wild Violet Eye by MARABETH SONESON. And it is very obviously the iris of an eye. And she talks about how the red royal fabric in this palette radiates an iridescence, which shares its word origin with iris. So you can see the inspiration behind this quilt. It's interesting because from a distance, the background fabric looks white, but it's really a very pale blue. And she used a metallic thread in quilting to do the specular highlights, to make it do exactly what an eye will do, where it reflects the light. I really like this one. So we're still in the Windham Fabric Challenge. This is Ocean Dance 2 by Linda Steele from Victoria, Australia. She said it's an abstract interpretation of what she sees, feels, and imagines when she looks under the sea. The piecing is beautiful and her color choices are beautiful, but really the magic of this quilt for me is the quilting. And so there's just a huge variety of quilting. There's teeny tiny spirals, there's wavy quilting, there's some almost pebble quilting, each one highlighting all the different elements of this quilt. It's a beautiful quilt to begin with, but the quilting just elevates it to the next level. So this is Sprout by Susan Braverman, and this is the Windham Fabric collection. I saw this one on Instagram and loved it on Instagram, and I love it even more in person. This is like grid quilting except wavy, and so it is really, really great. So it's straight line through one way and wavy through the other. She says crossweave fabric meets the plant life cycle in this quilt. Water drops on seeds, seeds sprout into tiny plants. Those plants drop seed and the cycle renews. I used all of the challenge fabric colors in a circular composition to abstractly imagine the process. And I love it. She didn't say that, I said that. I'm sure she loves it too, but I just think this is really pretty. So this is Weird Shift by Robert Boscher. We're on Robert Boscher quilt number 2. I love this one so much as well. He says he's had a lot of changes personally, breaking past routines and habits and finding new ways of living. And so the idea of showing a break to the core of something or someone, but still finding stability was appealing to him. So the piecing across and the break down the middle, and then this beautiful quilting, teeny tiny quilting in that apple green all through the whole quilt. It is just really meaningful and stunning, and I love it. So this is Local Density 01 by Charles Cameron. This is the 3rd place. In 1978, renowned multidisciplinary artist Annie Albers created one of my most favorite geometric prints. Each time I gaze at her piece, I'm mesmerized by the illusion of local density that she created by strategically placing black and white squares among a field of randomly pointing HSTs. He did his interpretation and purposely chose to pair colors of both similar and dissimilar color values to create the 3 different regions. The quilting on it is amazing. The piecing is really, really tiny and impressive. And I love the apple green trim around the edge. So this is Blended by FRAN GULICK, and she is Cotton and Joy. So if you have seen some of her quilt patterns, Cup Away, she has some beautiful quilt patterns. This is her. This is the 2nd place winner. And what I love about this, you know, I'm so nerdy and mathy. What I love about it is how it starts with the curved pieces on the one side. So it's like the pie piece in the apple green. And then on the other side, it's the reverse of that, which is the pie piece that's in that teal. And then you put them together, and where they meet makes the whole complete orange peel. It's so orderly. It makes me happy how the green and the teal come together. So this is Well Sheet by Matthew FRIESZ from Minnesota. He's Quilty Architect on Instagram. I love his stuff. He is an architect, and you can see it in his work. It is so precise and so crisp and so clean, and his understanding of color is really amazing. So he did this fantastic quilting, which I heard him lament about on Instagram. It's like a sheet over rollers in an industrial manufacturing. He said, my background in architecture and drawing led me to an isometric layout, which I paired with quilting that accentuate the curve forms to trick the eye into thinking 3D. I imagine the design as a fabric on in an assembly line caught between rollers on its journey from printing to packing. I really like it. This is Mosaic Shift by Sharon SWANSON. We're still in the Windham Fabric Challenge. It is exactly what she describes, I think, and just playing with this idea that shifts your eye between the 3 horizontal pieces. And so there's hand quilting here. There's a lot of detail, and where they intersect at the top right is really just amazing. So this is Unboxed, or I Want Moire, by Heather AKERBURG. Her statement says, I always jokingly say that I want the viewer's eyes to vibrate when they look at my quilts. This year I learned the visual effect that I'm after has a name, moire. The moire effect happens when a ruled pattern is overlaid with a similar pattern. Most people are familiar with this in relation to computer screens when you try to take a picture using a digital camera that represents the image in a network of pixels. The result is a wavy appearance. And she got it. I mean, this is like This is moire right here. So this is Alpha by Sarah Ruiz. And she said, after creating an alphabet quilt with my quilting bee, I wanted to revisit the theme on my own. I was curious to see if I could evoke each letter using only one square and quarter circle blocks on a 4x4 grid. Well, it didn't work for every letter, darn H and T. I was pleased with the overall effect. The letters are not always immediately apparent on first viewing, and I have enjoyed seeing a flash of recognition from friends when the letters suddenly jump out at them. I now have several other ideas for alphabet quilts and hope this will be the first. Ooh, I hope this is the first in a long series too, Sarah. It's modern. The curves, it kind of feels like 70s and 80s, but then it also feels really modern and fresh now. So clever, so clever. And just beautiful straight line quilting that enhances the letters. This is Sarah Muslim LEFEBRE. I'm sorry, I'm probably butchering that. Jagged little HRTs. Dedicated to Latifa Safir's Hurdy ruler. You've already won me over in spite of me, and don't be alarmed if I fall head over feet. And because of those threads, it has a just slightly different bit from the colorway. Even though it's all the same fabrics, it just has a really different look about it. This is Garden Under the October Moon by Sati Beano from Querétaro, Mexico. I think I mispronounced that because of the accent, but it's a beautiful applique. It's just this little garden that if you look at the quilting up close, and it's sneaky because you don't see it at first. At the very top right of the quilt, there's very dense concentric circles of quilting. Hand quilting it looks, and then as it goes further out, it gets wider and wider and wider in the quilting. It really makes it feel like it's a garden in the moonlight, and the moon is off of the canvas of the quilt, and what we see is like the ripple effects of the pale light onto this little garden. So this is Beyond by Nancy Larkin. I love this. She says that her inspiration came from the wall of windows in the French chapel Notre Dame de Haute, Our Lady of Heights, built in 1955 and designed by the architect Le Corbusier. She says, this place of worship is a pilgrimage chapel where patrons visit because of their belief in the life eternal, a life beyond. The windows slant toward their centers at varying degrees, which lets in light at different angles. I wanted my quilt to pull you in so you can wonder, what is beyond? It does that for me. And what an interesting use of the colors. So she used the two values of the purple and the two values of the blue to create shadows, and then the apple green as like the front facing of the building. This is Tentacle by Mary Arter. I wish I could have you all with me. This one is so compelling and interesting. So there's this teeny tiny quilting on it with the applique circles. It says over a base of Timtex interfacing and high loft batting. Behind each one of the little suckers of an octopus tentacle. And then behind that is a very tight quilting. So It really, like you see it and go, yes, my goodness, it looks like it just could reach out and go. This is Murmuration by Tamara Stunnel from Victoria, Australia. She said she's often fascinated by reels on Instagram showing repetition of production. Me too, actually. Actually, she says she was inspired by a cake decoration that created the effect of triangles moving in waves as the cake was spun. And so it's called Murmuration. And you can just really see that inspiration in the quilt. This is Interaction 3 by Sophie Z, and she's from Switzerland. She said this quilt is part of a series called Interaction, which the idea is to work with big shapes that overlap and then imagine what could happen at the intersections. And so you can see the little piecing where they cross over, the two colors as they cross over. It kind of plays with that idea of transparency. So she's got grid quilting, and then there's like a brick shape, and then some straight line quilting in between it. It's visually very pleasing. So it's the sort of thing that from a distance is really interesting, and then as you get closer, you see some of the really beautiful and subtle details that she has included in the quilt. So this is Echeveria by Wendy Starr, and she said she's made a number of botanical quilts, all roughly the same size. Some of her recent ones are abstracted from realism. The fabric colors in this year's challenge reminded me of a succulent in the Echeveria family. I learned a new piecing technique to put it together and repeated the leaf motifs in the negative space. The leaf motif in the quilting and the negative space is my favorite part. The actual botanical is beautiful, but that quilting and how it just pulls you out from like the center of the succulent, really interesting. Okay, so this is Pop by Nikki Wolsey. And she said her first response to the fabric bundle was to be absolutely wowed by the apple green and chartreuse color. That color was a jolt of energy, and it literally popped for her. And so you can tell the way she interpreted it was to make a balloon animal, the classic balloon dog, because that's what popped for her. And so against the two purple checkerboard background, she said she wanted to explore the modern quilting techniques of using the illusions of transparency in the design. The balloon is completely machine pieced and hand appliqued. The color still excites as it pops off the fabric. I agree, it absolutely pops. This is Moonlights by Sophie Thomas from Switzerland, and she said it's a modern study working on the staging of the colors with a drawing, combining whole or partial circular forms and other geometric shapes and lines. So you can see the play of the shapes and then against the quilting. So the straight lines, the horizontal X and Y axis with the curves around it, it really just one pulls you into the other and vice versa. All right, so we're still in the Windham Fabric Challenge. This is David Owens Hastings, who I met yesterday, and he is just as lovely in person as he seems like he would be and as he is on Instagram. Taller than I expected by a lot. But this is Azami Thistle. And he said the colors selected for this challenge immediately brought to mind a thistle flower, perhaps because they were in bloom when the fabric arrived. And so he did the needle-like petals and the transition of the color from the stem to the tips. He said another goal for this quilt was to keep plenty of negative space so the quilting lines can really be a standout feature. He said, when in doubt, take something out. That's his mantra. And azami is the Japanese word for thistle. But you can really see what he was going for with the needle-like petals and how it does go lighter as it gets out. And then lots of really interesting quilting in the apple green and also that plum color and the teal. It's very minimalistic. It's not simple at all. It's not basic at all. But it is very pared back. And so it's very calming. Do you hear me lowering my voice? It's very peaceful and calming. And so it has that Zen-like feel to it. So I think he really accomplished what he set out to do. So this is Outside to Play by Sarah Brown. I hope you immediately see her reference. It looks like bubbles. It looks like we've blown bubbles, and the iridescence of the way the light hits them and gets the blue and green all in the same bubble. So she did matchstick quilting, although she did a really interesting encircling each bubble. So they actually aren't closed off. So the colors don't touch each other in very many places. So she used the quilting to actually create the bubble, which as bubbles do, because they're transparent, you know, you don't really know where it starts and ends, but it just really achieves that, in my opinion. I thought this one had a shot at winning as well. She said she wanted to capture the colors, the feelings, and the simplicity of that summertime activity of blowing bubbles with her children. I could look at this one all day too. So this is A is for Apple by Kathy Calloway. And she said when she saw the picture of the fabrics, it immediately took her back to her childhood eating apples at the county fair. It is apple green, so there's obviously that, but she found that design style beautifully because she has the apple, and it is 100% apple, and there's nothing that says apple here except for this A that is in quilting on the top right of the quilt. And if you weren't looking for it, you might not even see it. And so it's just very subtle, that reference to childhood, like the postcards that say A is for apple. This is All Squared Up by I said that really funny. All Squared Up by Linda Branting. You can see why. Since there's a big gigantic apple green square right in the middle, except it has that same transparency that so many other artists have talked about. So you have what would happen if you put apple green over dark mulberry, you get fuchsia, and same with the teal. And she did a very interesting combination of quilting. So she quilted the entire green square in a grid of green apple green thread, and it extends to the edge of the square. And then what she did for the quilting on the plum or mulberry or fuchsia is a tinier grid in the same purple as the fabric. And that overlaid the green, and then again with the teal on the right-hand side. And then in the back, it's this like teeny tiny, almost like micro grid of the background fabric. Okay, so this is Circling the Squares by Jo Wollschlager. And she said, do you see many playful circles, or do you see the 9 squares? Yes, yes, I see many playful circles and 9 squares. She said, using negative space and value, the circles come together to outline 9 squares, which recede or push forward depending on how you look at the quilt. They're having a lively conversation, and neither can exist without the other. So it's a 7x7 grid using 1 simple quilt block, a square with 1, 2, 3, and 4 quarter circles. The density of the quilting varies in order to emphasize the 9 squares and the grid. And you can really see that up close. So the bigger squares have bigger quilting. I'm not touching the quilt, everyone. And there's tiny, tiny little grid quilting in between that really sets off the circles and the squares. So this is Layered Circles by Lori Tauscher from Canada. Just in case you're wondering, you don't have to use every single one of the fabrics in the Windham Fabric Challenge. So she chose, I guess, 4 of the 6. And it really has that feeling like seafoam. But I'll be honest with you, I'm also having this feeling like it has a lot of the lines of a sports car, like the steering wheel of a sports car or the wheels. The quilting is exceedingly dense with pebbles and a stipple, teeny tiny stipple on the purple. And then the kind of the echoing the lines of the light blue and the teal. And so it really, there's an applique that makes each layer set out, and it just is one of those things. It's like you look at it and then you want to look at it again, and then you want to look at it again. So this is called Maybe by Isabel Selleck. And she says much of her creative process is driven by a desire to see if something that seems challenging is something that I can successfully complete. So for this quilt, I used a design that I had been turning over for a while. Could I create a quilt entirely of 1/8" strips? If so, what challenges would I face, and what would I need to deem it a success? The answer to the last question is usually if I learn something, even if I decide to keep working. I'm happy to have learned a lot about working with narrow strips and finishing a quilt with such a thick quilt top. Oh, I didn't think about how that would add to the thickness of it. So it's 1/8" strips, and then she just straight line quilted through each strip. And from a distance, it looked like she used yellow and orange because of the way the apple green and the purple played off of each other.